Welcome, everyone. I'm sorry we're in this sort of a big space and that I'm so far away from you to have conversation this morning, but I hope that we can still have a good conversation. I'm Jeanne Davies, and I serve as Executive Director for Anabaptist Disabilities Network. I'm ordained in the Church of the Brethren, and I've been in this position for about 4 years. I also have a graduate certificate in disability and ministry, and have been working in disability and ministry for about 8 years now. So, let me see if I can move this PowerPoint with my mouse and if everything will work. Yes. So I'd be interested, before I begin, to hear some stories about your experience of disability, stories of discomfort around disability, or denial of disability, or even disability acceptance, embracing that. Stories particularly of the church, of ways people have been excluded or ways they have been included that have felt good. Is anybody interested in sharing? And do we have another mic for people to share? Oh, we got a mic in the back. Okay.
We have our roving mic. I'm going to take advantage of having it right now and share an experience, if that's all right.
Excellent.
I'm just thinking about some of the, I've spent time in evangelical and charismatic spaces, sojourned among them for periods of time. And I remember, well, there's a whole sort of culture of like, your faith is not as good if you are not cured in a lot of those spaces, right? There's this sort of pressure from the church to be physically, I mean, they're welcoming and very nice if you have a disability early on, and then if it stays, they stop being that way over time.
Because somehow you didn't pray enough, or your faith wasn't enough, or so you weren't healed. Yeah, we can talk about the difference between healing and curing, maybe, if you want to talk about that later. So, but yeah, it's different, healing and curing. Not necessarily cured, but to be healed.
Yeah, my mother was in a wheelchair from long before I was born, so I grew up dealing with a wheelchair in the 60s and the 70s and the 80s and the 90s. In multiple cultures, she moved with us to Turkey as well, and the different reactions, the different concerns, the problems she ran into. As I was very young, that was what normal life was. But I remember her great frustration, particularly in churches, when they said, "Would you all stand?" And so I've appreciated here that simple phrase, "if you're able," I know would have made a lot of difference for her, because she wasn't able, and she always felt people were staring at her because she wasn't standing up. And I remember at a government office once, a friend had taken her to talk to us about Social Security, and the woman kept asking the helper, "Can she do this? Can she do that?" My mother said, "Yes, I can," and over and over, but the woman kept it up. And in Turkey, we found that a general attitude in society was that if one is physically disabled, one must be mentally disabled as well. And she had a terrible time with that. It infuriated her. So anyway, those are some of my growing up experiences.
Thank you for sharing that. And she lived through that time when things changed with the Americans with Disabilities Act. And
she actually disliked the American Disabilities Act because before that, people always were very kind and made special accommodation for her. Once it was systematized, she felt more she was no longer so special and given this nice treatment. Oh. So I remember parking at Disneyland, and they sort of looked at us odd and put us right up next to the front gate. Later, they've created a handicap parking section just further away. So silly things like that. But
interesting that attitudes changed, a little bit of pushback maybe.
Well, it was so unusual back in the early 60s or so to say to someone, "Well, we have a wheelchair, how can we work this?" And they always would.
Interesting. Yeah, thank you for sharing that.
Sure.
I found that being with my parents as they aged, and they both got cancer, and I accompanied them to their doctor appointments, that people would do the same thing, right? Ageism, assume that doctors would speak to me and not to them. I'm like, they're sitting right here. So I developed a strategy for that, which was never looking at the doctor and turning my body towards my mother or my dad, to force them to talk to them, right, instead of me. Yeah. And the connection, I'll tell a story about that in a little bit, but the connection between people thinking people who are physically disabled are also intellectually disabled, right? Yeah. Anyone else? We're telling stories about experience of disability and being included or being excluded, or acceptance or denial. Denial is a pretty common one, especially with age-related disability.
Just really quick, in a previous church I was part of, there were a number of developmentally disabled adults who lived in a home and which was connected to the church, and so would come on Sundays. And two things stood out to me. One, they had been part of the community for a very long time, much longer than I actually had been part of the community. And two things. One is it would always come up around communion, and I mean, this was kind of for a while they were a dipping church, and so there was always these issues around people and sanitary things, but only for the developmentally disabled adults, not for any of the other people, right? Like that was always the cause that we needed to change the way we did communions. You know, people who had been part of the community, but they were kind of seen as like, well, we can't do it all together with them. And the other was that they had a special, like a Sunday school class that was kind of specifically designed for these adults, which was really great. They had their own room. I mean, it was really well known, and they were really cared for in that way. But it didn't appear in the bulletin. So they listed all of their Sunday school classes, and they didn't list that one because they knew it was just for some people who already would know they were going to that class. So one of the things that I just gently reminded us is like, well, even if everyone's not going to that class, let's list it just like all the other Sunday school classes because it's valuable. And I think people really did see that community as valuable, but like it's those subtle little things that communicate you're different or you're not fully part of the structure of the system. So I think those are two things that stood out to me from there.
Thank you. Anyone else have something to share? Can you wait for the mic? Yeah, right up front here.
Most of my career involved people with disabilities. My first job up at Children's Hospital in Boston, I was put on a multidisciplinary team, and we saw children from first few months of life on up to adults. And we had various specialties in medicine. I was one of the psychologists, very interdisciplinary and all kinds of disabilities. And then I got invited to move over to a research group that was working with severe disabilities, people who had never walked or talked because sometimes cerebral palsy, but there's other neurological disorders, or they had an accident and they had a spinal cord injury or something like that, and they lost function, so they couldn't talk or walk. Someone had a grant to develop computerized systems to help them communicate through computers. And we found a lot of these people actually had strengths in cognition or normal cognition, even though severely impaired bodies. And then I was invited to be part of some grants on deafness, and that was quite a different experience. And there were a lot of aspects. But I think the most challenging group to work with are individuals who have developmental delays, and whether they're children or adults, they really do not have normal cognition. And for people to know how to interact with them in meaningful ways and to keep them safe and to give them appropriate things, because at the level they're functioning at, they can succeed and do pretty well. It's just you can't have expectations that will go with their age. But and then just one other thing, I also worked with groups that are twice exceptional. There are some very, very gifted intellectually individuals that are in bodies that are severely impaired, or Their bodies are very normal. They have a specific learning disability, and people just don't understand it because there's a brain and genetic difference. And they really have some problems functioning, and they can be quite bright. But it's very confusing for the folks out there to understand that and accept it.
Well, my sister, who lost her sight to something called retinitis pigmentosa when she was about 7 years old, she became legally blind. She had been normal sighted before then. And no, well, it was from that disease, Ginger. And talking to her over the years, I said, "Oh, what's it like when you're out in public and you're by yourself?" And she said, "Well, an irritating thing is people will shout at her." And I said, "Well, what do you do about that?" And she said, "Well, I politely inform them, I'm legally blind, but I'm not deaf."
Yeah. Yeah, that's a really common one. Yeah. And when I learned that, I thought, do I do that? Maybe I do that, right? I have to be careful not to raise the volume of my voice when I'm speaking to someone who is blind. It's interesting that that is one of our reactions. Well, so we have a varied experience. Welcome, youth. Thank you for being here. We have a varied experience of disability of all kinds, and we're going to kind of dive into that. I don't know if I'm going to have time to go through everything, but we'll move with the Holy Spirit. Feel free to raise your hand and talk. Let's just have a really good, rich conversation. So the prevalence of disability in the U.S. is that 25% of adults and 33% in rural areas are disabled. 8.7% of children are disabled, and 25% of households have a disabled family member. So it's quite prevalent. So if you think you don't know people who are disabled or don't have disabled people in your congregation, you are likely mistaken. Yes. Oh, some of our medical professionals might be able to give a technical definition of disability. I think that is based on a technical definition of disability, and I'm not sure what that criterion is, but it would include people who are visually impaired, people who are deaf, people who have problems with mobility, people who are intellectually disabled or experience mental illness. It's a really wide category. Yeah. I would guess it's people who qualify for disability benefits. Don't quote me on that. The Americans with Disabilities Act was passed in 1990, and all of our public spaces, public buildings have to be accessible. Our schools have to be accessible to people of all kinds of impairments, right? Vision, intellectual disability, mobility, right? That's when curb cuts came in, all of that. But the church was exempted from the Americans with Disabilities Act, and so there was no legal compulsion that says that we have to be accessible at all. However, I think that's Americans with Disabilities Act legislating accessibility is a low bar for the church, right? We should be excelling at including everyone, no matter what their impairments are, and embracing their gifts, and be a model, right? That's what we're supposed to be, as a model of how we live in right relationship with one another. Hello. Interesting. There we go. So I'm going to talk more about this in my sermon, so you get to hear this twice. I'm sorry. I try not to repeat myself completely, but there are different models of disability And the first one that I'm going to talk about is the medical model of disability. And in the medical model of disability, the problem is located in the person. So there's some kind of impairment. They can't see, they can't hear, they can't move like everyone else. They have an intellectual disability. And the solution for that is treatment, some kind of intervention. So medication, or therapy, or surgery, or some kind of an aid, glasses, hearing aid, walker, wheelchair. In the social model of disability, however, let me back up a little bit and say, this is an important model, but maybe not the most important for the church, because what this allows us to do is distance ourselves. The problem is the person. We can refer that out. We can get them to a mental health professional. We can help them get some kind of aids, right? Or therapy. And it still locates the issue, the concern in that individual. There's a social model of disability, and in the social model of disability, what disables people is our social structures, the way that our society is created, including our physical structures, inaccessible physical structures, but also the way that we relate to one another. So some examples of that, in the Reformation, the scripture was translated into the vernacular, into common languages, right, from the Latin. Before that, only priests and people who trained in Latin could read the scriptures, or Greek, the original language, right, Hebrew. So it was the clergy who could read the scripture. So they translated into common languages, and then everybody could read the Bible for themselves. Hallelujah, right? This was the great thing of the Reformation. And that made the Bible more accessible to people, except people who couldn't read. And so increasingly our worship is focused on the printed word in a bulletin or on a screen or in a hymnal. And I can't tell you the number of people with intellectual disabilities that I've seen holding the hymnal upside down or the bulletin upside down, because they want to participate. They want to do the same thing everyone else is doing, but they can't read. Another example would be if having bread that is not gluten-free available for communion. If you have celiac disease or a gluten intolerance, then that means you can't participate in communion if you can't eat the bread. So those are examples of social models of disability. I want you to remember this picture. I'm going to tell this story about a food ordering counter that was at Mennonite a few years ago. So remember the picture that says need assistance. So in that case, it is the social structures that disable. It's not the problem, it's not the person with celiac disease who is the problem, right? It's the fact that we have created a ritual that does not welcome and include that person. And then a relational model of disability. So we know that people who experience mental illness, people who are intellectually disabled, people who are autistic, all have impoverished social networks. They just don't have as many social connections. And I really feel like this is the call of the church. This is where we should shine, is in creating relationship with other people, particularly people who are on the margins. So let me ask you, can someone, Pastor Arthur, could you watch my time for me? Thank you so much. Let me know when we have like maybe 5-10 minutes left, right? Okay. So what does it mean to belong? That is for you to answer. What are some things that come to mind? You are included, I heard.
So beyond being included, being valued, because we can include somebody but not value them for who they are and what they bring to the table.
So you're valued for what you bring to the table and who you are. You're listened to. Your voice, thank you. Your voice is important. Yeah.
You have something to give as well as to receive.
You have something to give as well as receive. Pretty soon I'm going to be able to just go home now. You can all teach each other. Yeah. So Eric Carter is a professor of special education. He used to be at Vanderbilt, now he's at Baylor University, and he has done a lot of study on intellectual disability and the church. And particularly, one of his foci, that's a really pretentious word, one of the things that he focuses on is belonging. So, and belonging is more than inclusion, right? So this is a model of churches, and at the far end you have exclusion, right? Where you say we don't, and he works particularly with people with intellectual disabilities and autism. So there's exclusion. We don't have anyone who's intellectually disabled or autistic in our congregation. You probably do. But if you don't, why not? It's a good question. Segregation, and that's when you might have like a Wednesday night program, right? You host a program for people who have special needs in your congregation on a Wednesday night, but they're not really part of the community. And then there's integration, where they would be present on a Sunday morning, but they might be downstairs, right, in another room with a separate program. Then inclusion, they are actually in the same room, all together, worshiping together with you, included in that space and time. And then there's belonging. And you noticed with belonging, my little screen is in front of that, with belonging, they're all integrated in the community, and also gifts appreciated and employed. So they are leading, and we're also learning from them. So it's a give and take. And also you'll notice that there's those little satellites outside the circle, and that means you don't just see each other on Sunday morning. You go out to coffee, you go out to lunch, you go to a movie, you go bowling. They have friends, right? Okay, and so Carter and his students have identified these 10 dimensions of belonging. In order to belong, you need to be present, you need to be there, and you need to have been invited. Somebody wants you there. Somebody's expressed that they're glad that you're there, and you're welcomed. Once you walk in the building or roll in the building, someone's there to greet you, and people are glad to see you. You'd be missed if you were gone. You're known, so people know you, what you like, what you don't like, what your gifts are. Sorry, maybe I'll just turn around. Accepted, supported, cared for, befriended, needed, that's that gifts piece, right? It's important you're here. We're not just being nice to you, right? We are being nice to you because that's a good thing to do, but we appreciate your gifts, and we wouldn't be the same without you. And loved. So one important thing is discerning needs. I remembered this story on this trip. I've been traveling for the last week and visiting and preaching and teaching and just talking with folks. And I remembered this story about needs discernment because somebody was saying some people have trouble expressing that they have a need. That's embarrassing, and they don't want to speak up. And then there are other people who have no problem speaking up. And when I was a young adult and I was in school, I was a part-time bus driver, and I drove a bus just like this for the Will Bus in the suburbs of Chicago. And their motto was, we move people, not buses. So it's a very friendly, small company when you get to know all the people on your route. So you have your regulars. And there was a woman who was disabled who we nicknamed Sarge. So she's an older woman, and she always wore like a little tweed hat and a raincoat, and she carried a cane, one of the ones that kind of have the hook on the top. And it depended on who was sitting in the seat. There's right next to the door, there's 3 handicap seats, right? And it depended on who was sitting in that seat, whether I would warn them or not, or maybe my mood, because she was perfectly capable of making space for herself. But when the door would open, Sarge would take her cane and she would go whack like this, and hook that cane right next to the person who was sitting in that seat. And startle them. And then she would laboriously haul herself up the steps and then look at them. And if they hadn't moved already by then, she would just glare. So there was a person who was capable of making space for herself, right? But not everybody is like that. Most of us are more reticent to let people know what we need. Mia Mingus is a disability advocate, and she talks about creating access intimacy. And access intimacy for her as a disabled person means people know her well enough, are good enough friends that they can anticipate what she will need or not need in any given situation. So she doesn't really even need to say anything often. Because they already know. This is what she calls access intimacy. And in order to have access intimacy, you need to really get to know someone. So how do we create relationship? I'm going to let that one be rhetorical. For one thing, relationships take time. In every sense of the word. It takes patience, slowing down, listening. It takes doing that over a long period of time. For people who have been hurt by the church, it takes even longer to build that trust. So when we create relationship, we understand and we accommodate needs, and everyone has them. And we discern and employ gifts. And, we often think of gifts discernment as a list of jobs in the church, right? We have this list of jobs on where can we plug you in, right? I would expand that and say, actually look at the person. They might have a gift that you need, right? That you didn't even know that you needed. Make a new job. I think my next slide is correcting assumption or not letting go of assumptions. But this is a song by a young woman who's a blogger. She's also autistic. She's also non-speaking. And she writes for Anabaptist Disabilities Network from time to time. And she wrote this song, and she wrote the words, and her caregiver, who plays guitar, wrote the music. And and sings it for her. So let's see if we can get this to play. It takes a little patience to listen to. It's a little on the long side. So deep breath and listen. This is a first-person perspective. Oh, yeah, I can do that. Okay.
I see the people walk by me as I ignore me as they talk, laugh, and yell. Some ignore everyone else too. I wonder if they even know I'm here. Them stare at me. I see the people walk by me as my one-on-one checks on me. Most ignore me as they talk, laugh, and yell. Some ignore everyone else too. I wonder if they even know I'm here. I am here. Some of them stare at me like I'm putting on a show. I am not sure that my strange mannerisms entertain or bother them, but they do know that I am here. I am here. I am here. I am here. I am here, and I may not be like you, but still I'm here. I am here. The nice lady wearing plaid walks over and talks to my staff, telling her how sweet and dedicated she must be to work with me. It's me, and I am here. I am here. The handsome young man comes over to flirt with my one-on-one. She enjoys this attention as she smiles and giggles, and they both seem to forget I am here. I am here. I am here. I am here. I am here, and I may not be like you, but still I'm here. I am here. You may not be aware of me, now that is okay, because eventually you will know I am here. I am here. I am here. What they don't know is that I hear and see everything. I am aware of all that goes on, and I smile to myself, and I'm happy to say I am here. I am here. I am here. I am here. I am so happy to be here. Weird mannerisms and all, and it's a joy to be here. Even if they do or don't know, I am here. is difficult, but I still want to be here, breathing the same air. I'm here for my friends, for my family, and even if you don't know I am here, I am still here for you. Still I'm here. Interesting what you can learn when nobody thinks you're paying attention. Hearing some of your secrets, you have a lot of opinions and thoughts. So do I, as I am here. I am here. I am here. I am here, and I may not be like you, but still I'm here. I am here. I would love to have you hear my opinions and my thoughts. Get past my weird mannerisms, we have a lot in common, as I do know you are here. You are here. My vocal sounds annoy you, I know they annoy me too. Let's get past that and we can enjoy our time together on this beautiful earth. We are here. We are here. You may not be aware of me, now that is okay, because eventually you will know I am here. 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 I am here, and I may not be like you, but still I'm here. I am here. Still I am here. I am here. I am here.
So Anne didn't communicate until she was 18, when she got a communication device. And she says, I prayed all the time. All I did was pray because the only person I could talk to was God. So what could we learn from someone who has literally prayed without ceasing for all their formative years? I think she brings a lot, and I love this song. It's so poignant, and she talks about not being seen, not being valued, but she also does that with humor and compassion. You know, she says, I hear all your secrets and opinions, and that's pretty interesting. and I'd like you to know mine too. And I know my vocalizations, and it might annoy you, and they annoy me too. Maybe we can get past that, all of us. And the most poignant is when she says, you may not know I am here, but I'm still here for you. Wow. Amazing. She's amazing. So I think Arthur's going to let me know when I run out of time, but I'm going to buzz through this. So checking assumptions, this is a little story which I told yesterday in the meeting on me making assumptions. I was at a disability and ministry conference, and there was a man there who was quite impaired with foreshortened limbs in a big wheelchair with 2 attendants who were periodically moving his arms and doing some kind of physical therapy. And I wonder why he's here. And maybe his caregivers are here, and they just brought him with for the day. And then the speaker that day was talking about not being patronizing. That was the topic of the speaker, not being patronizing towards adults with intellectual disabilities. Don't treat them like children. And this man had a question, and they brought him the mic, and he said, I am a pastor of a congregation of adults with intellectual disabilities, and I used Mr. Potato Head as an illustration for the body of Christ. Do you think that was patronizing? And I thought, he's a pastor, right? I was filled with shame about the assumptions that I'd made about him because of his body. So we need to check our assumptions, always assume intelligence, right? No matter what their body looks like, even if they can't talk. This is a story which, as Joseph Campbell would say, I don't know if this story actually happened this way, but I know this story is true. Abraham Lincoln was having a white tablecloth dinner at the White House, crystal, silver, fine china, the whole thing. And he invited a simple farmer. And after dinner, the farmer, to cool his coffee, when the coffee was served, poured his coffee into the saucer and blew on it and drank. And what do you think Abraham Lincoln did? Same thing. So the story goes. This is a way of normalizing that behavior and making that person not feel awkward or uncomfortable. When somebody does something that's a little odd for our social norms, we can just embrace that. As long as no one is getting hurt by that, right? Why not help that person feel more comfortable in your community? Social ramps, we expect people who have social anxiety or social deficits, have trouble communicating with others. Well, they just need to learn social skills. Again, that's that medical model, right? The problem is them, and they need to learn. And we can get them social skills training. But really what we should be doing is creating social ramps. And that is, we who are gifted at conversation, we who are gifted at interacting with others, should learn how to interact with people who are socially awkward, who have trouble doing that, right? We can learn how to do that. And it turns out that when we do that, we create a more hospitable environment for everyone. We reduce everyone's social anxiety. This is a scholar that I just recently became familiar with, Isabella Nafsima, and she's an Indonesian disability scholar. She's here in the States getting her doctorate, and she talks about decolonizing disability ministry. And one of the things she talks about is, kind of less emphasis on words and less emphasis on teaching and that aha moment, and more on learning together by living and practicing side by side. And I thought, oh, that's really Anabaptist, right? Just kind of being steeped in this different way of living and living out our faith side by side together. And she described that as a spiritual formation, as a slow communal turning through lived experience. Mia Minga said, I don't just want a seat at the table, I want to build a more magnificent table together. So important to have people who are disabled as a part of your conversation. There's a slogan in the disability justice movement, nothing about us without us. So involve people who experience disability in the conversation about how to become more accessible as a community. I'm going to tell you just a little bit, buzz real quickly through Anabaptist, I got 2 minutes to buzz through Anabaptist Disabilities Network, but you're feel free to talk to me or look at our beautiful new website, which was just launched 2 weeks ago, AnabaptistDisabilitiesNetwork.org. We were founded 20 years ago out of the Mennonite church. We are an independent nonprofit. We provide services at conferences, including Mennonite Convention and Church of the Brethren Annual Conference, National Older Adult Conference of the Church of the Brethren, National Youth Conference. Preaching, doing workshops, offering seminars, and equipping sessions on various disabilities or disability in general. Accessibility support, providing wheelchairs and scooters, hearing assistance devices, accessible bulletins for tablets and screen readers for people who are visually impaired, providing sensory rooms. This is a sensory area at National Youth Conference in the conference hall. We provide print resources. We have a study guide that came out of the MCUSA accessibility resolution that was passed a couple summers ago. We were sponsors of that resolution. There's a Learn, Pray, Join initiative also welcoming everybody that has resources. We have a mental health resource, a disability language guide. There are copies of the language guide out on the table. Language is always changing. Our Connections newsletter is issued quarterly. Books, an accessible membership curriculum for people with intellectual disabilities. Again, there's a sample copy out on the table. You've used our congregational accessibility survey, and so I'm glad that you have done that. That has led to a lot of fruitful conversation with some people here. I visit congregations. We also have field associates that visit congregations and preach and teach and help with accessibility audits. That's a really awkward picture of me. And we have a cadre of field associates who are experts in various aspects of disability ministry because, we can't all know everything. So they have their specialties and consult on things: dementia, mental health, intellectual disability, child development, all of those different kinds of things. We have advocates in congregations, so you could designate a congregational advocate if you like to relate to Anabaptist Disabilities Network, and they just receive and are aware of our materials and let the congregation know of things that are happening and support the congregation, kind of lead the effort to be more accessible. And they advocate for others. Self-advocates get tired. We have a barrier-free matching grant, $500 for any project that would make your congregation more accessible. We have webinars. Those are recorded and they're on our website if you ever wanted to look at those as individuals or as a group. That's our old website, but we are in the middle of our annual online fall fundraiser, so if you want to contribute, that would be welcome. And ways that you can support ADN, well, you've already done that. You are a partner. You're not only a partner, but a sustaining partner. Thank you very much for your contribution to our work and the work that you are doing here. And individuals can donate to ADN by check or online. If you have the means, become a Building the Future partner, which is $1,000 a year for 3 years. Like and share our posts on social media, follow us, and support us in prayer. And that is it. Sorry, I don't have more time for questions, but I'm glad to stay and answer questions. I don't know, Arthur, we probably need to move, but we could. Okay, yes. Thank you for your time and for being here. Yes, okay. Yeah. All right, thank you. I think we're done.